ko Samantha Gain tuku ingoa, ko Kapakahare Matua Metlink Aho. So I'm Samantha Gain, I'm the Group Manager of Metlink here at the Regional Council, and give me great pleasure to be able to welcome you all here today to our office. Really pleased to be able to make our premises available for events like this. We haven't done it that often, and I think it'll be a great thing for us to continue doing into the future. Just going to start off with a couple of housekeeping matters. So this building was rebuilt about 2 years ago, so is 100% NBS, but if we should have an earthquake, then it's a matter of drop, cover and hold, which might be under those small chairs. But be assured that there's a safe space. If the alarm rings, then the exit is sort of go through this, the door here, and there's a doorway just out the back here, and the gathering area is in the car park at the back of the building. But there's a lot of us here from GW, so just follow us if that should happen. And the bathrooms are out sort of the way you came before the foyer on the left. The building, as you might be aware, it locks off at 4:30. So if you're leaving the building, then you'll need to push the red button on the inside of the door to exit the building. And if you want to exit and come back in, then you'll need to have a friend that you're told that you're going out to be able to come back in. So here at Metlink, we're the Public Transport Authority for the Wellington region, and really delighted to be able to provide the premises to host Carol today. For us, like every public transport authority, moving towards mode shift, increasing customer focus, and of course carbon reduction are really top of mind for us, and the digital and technology space has a really big part to play in us reaching our goals in that regard. Some of the things that we've got going on at the moment that I know lots of you in the audience have involvement with in various regards. We've got an on-bus announcement system being almost rolled out at the moment. We've got a refresh of our real-time information program underway. We rolled out Snapper on the rail network for electronic ticketing last year, and we'll be transitioning to the national ticketing solution in the next few years. And lots of, I guess, possibly might be smaller technology enhancements and things that we're looking at, particularly with an accessibility lens. So we're very interested in understanding about all new developments that are out there and picking those up as we can. I think another thing we've got on is our on-demand service in Tawa, and also another aspect which is sort of digital, which is revenue generating for us, is an increasing amount of digital advertising that we have throughout the network. So there are lots of different ways in which we sort of harness digital and technology in this region. The data side of it as well, increasingly, there's a lot of data available to us, and we've got questions, what do we do with all this data? We've recently established a data warehouse, and we'll be looking at how we harness that data and how we use that going forward. One of the things that Carol is interested in is data standards, and that's something that I particularly am really interested in, how we might take that sort of ethos forward in this country. So welcome to Greater Wellington, and I will hand over to Lee, who's going to introduce Carol.
Thank you, Samantha. Kia ora koutou katoa, ko Lee Mackenzie tōku ingoa. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the Manager of Future Transport at Waka Kotahi, but I'm actually here tonight in my capacity as the International Director for ITS New Zealand. I would also like to extend a very warm welcome to everyone who is here, and especially to Carol, as well as to say a very big thank you to Greater Wellington for co-hosting this event with ITS New Zealand and for providing the venue. I would also like to thank ITS New Zealand's ITS New Zealand's members, but especially our gold and silver members. Without your support, we would not be able to host events like this. For those of you who are not familiar with ITS New Zealand, it is New Zealand's peak body for intelligent transport systems and future transport solutions. We are part of the ITS Asia Pacific Group and Board, and also the World Congress Board. So if you're interested in becoming a member of ITS New Zealand, you can speak to Armin, and he's going to stick up his hand right now. Thank you. Who is here tonight, or any one of the board members, directors, including myself. I can see Mark Gregory over there. I'm not sure if anyone else is here from ITS New Zealand. It might be the three of us. Or if you want more information about ITS New Zealand, you can go onto the website and find out some more. Also, if you're interested in attending more events like this, then you can sign up to receive notifications from ITS New Zealand. But I would especially like to encourage you to attend ITS New Zealand's TTEC conference, which is our annual conference, which is taking place in Wellington at Takina at the lovely new conference centre on the 26th and 27th of September. The conference themes, I'm just going to go through this really quickly. We will get to the main event and the start shortly. Just do my bit. So the topics for the conference, you can see them up there: resilience, all really critical, important themes for transport at the moment. So resilience and sustainability, digital infrastructure and data, equity and accessibility, shared public and integrated mobility, and electric connected and automated vehicles. Over the 2 days, there will be 50 plus local and international speakers, including central and local government. Nearly there. Just one other thing I wanted to mention was that we are very excited to have Sarah Kaufman from the New York Rudin Centre for Transportation as our keynote speaker. So if you haven't registered to attend, I encourage you to do so soon. Early bird registrations close next week. And now to the main event, Carol. I am really excited to be able to formally introduce Carol to Wellington. I've actually known Carol for several years, and I've been politely hassling her to come to New Zealand for a very long time. I hope it has been polite, Carol.
Very polite.
And speak in New Zealand. So thank you very much for making a detour on your way to Australia next week. I'm just going to say a little bit about Carol. There's some information up there about her, but she is an expert in transport technologies, and especially in relation to public transport and connected mobility. She is a former co-chair of the US Transportation Research Board Committee on Emerging and Innovative Public Transport and Technologies, and she is a member of the International Program Committee of the ITS World Congress. I know there's a lot more, but I think it's now time for you to speak, Carol. There will be time for questions at the end of this and an opportunity to do some more networking afterwards and come up and speak to Carol as well. So over to you, Carol.
Thank you so much.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's perfect slide.
I'll stop now.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for all the folks that brought us to this beautiful venue. And the benefit of me sitting down is you really don't know how short I really am. This is exciting. Usually I'm standing at a podium and it ends about here. You can just see the top of my head. But anyway, thank you all for coming. Hopefully there'll be some food for thought here over the next little bit in the presentation. And here's a basic outline of what I'm going to cover. There's kind of one thing missing on this initial slide because I'm going to give you some food for thought about equity and accessibility before we launch into the other topics here. But these topics are kind of things that we're all discussing in the industry right now. And a lot of us are having discussions on LinkedIn that could be good, that could be bad. But a lot of these are kind of top of mind for folks this year and probably a little bit next year. So this gives you an idea of the basic structure of the presentation. And just overall, I suppose you could say this every year, that transportation is really at a critical stage. But I feel like it's even more now because of our discussions about the environment, the impact that transportation has on the environment, and kind of vice versa. You know, the environment has an impact on mobility as well. And I can tell you from the US perspective, just over the last week, California does not get a hurricane with that much rain. And you could see all the damage that was done. I live in the northeast part of the US, and we've had kind of a strange summer with a lot of hot and humid weather, but at least we have not had these severe things that are going on. We have been subject to the smoke from the Canadian fires. And I've lived in the area where I live now my entire life. I've never seen anything like that. So we just need to be mindful of the different impacts and the fact that there is not one solution to it, which is why I'm sort of presenting a couple of different perspectives. So just to speak really quickly about equity, when I think about equity in ITS technology, in public transport, I sort of think about it in three different ways. And one is that I think, having been in the ITS and public transport industry pretty much my whole career, and thank you for not saying how long that was, I really appreciate that. We've overlooked a lot of things in the ITS space. I dare say we've overlooked a lot of it in public transport. We're getting much better, but we've overlooked things like accessibility. And for example, you would think in the US, we passed a law back in 1990 called the Americans with Disabilities Act. And we required every public transport authority to make all of their vehicles accessible. But we didn't give them any money to do it. Now, not a lot of foresight there. I mean, everybody was very excited about having an actual law about providing accessible access. But I think we've also overlooked a lot of other things, like culture, like gender. And I think this is a global discussion that we're having. So, it's kind of hard once you design these technology systems to kind of go backwards and say, oh, what did we leave out? But that's a little bit where we are with things like automated vehicles, for example. A lot of them are not accessible. So we've got to go back and think about how we're going to make them accessible. The other thing on the technology side, and this is kind of my second point here, is that not everyone is going to have access to the technology that we're providing them, whether it's in the public transport space or somewhere else. And we need to be mindful of what the alternatives are. If somebody doesn't have a smartphone or they don't feel comfortable using an app, we've got to make allowances for that. It's just not acceptable to build something that has this great capability to help, like our public transport, but then we're not making it accessible to everyone. The other thing that we tend to leave out is we've been talking about equity now for several years. And that's great, and we need to keep talking about it. But I've raised the question, and I'm not the only one, asking, so how do we know we got there? We're having a lot of discussions. That's very good. It's bringing the topic up to the top. But unless we come up with really concrete measures, it's going to be hard to know whether we've gotten there. The last bit is from a good friend of mine who used to be the executive director of ITS UK, Jenny Martin. And in the ITS World Congress a couple of years ago, she pointed out some really critical things on the data side that get often left behind. Anyone that's read the book about bias in data, particularly against people who consider themselves female, that kind of goes right into ITS. Are we, have we accounted for everyone? So that's the diversity piece. And are we making sure that when we analyze that data, we're also not introducing any kind of bias? So I just want you all to kind of keep those things in the back of your mind as I'm running through the presentation. And I just wanted to sort of throw a few more things there that I think are very positive about some impact assessments that are going on around the world. One of them is in the UK, the Department for Transport, which is the national equivalent of a Department of Transportation or
Ministry of Transport.
The Ministry of Transport. They insist that every project, technology or not, goes through this impact assessment. And they're asking all the right questions. We need to embed that thinking about equity at the very beginning of whatever we're doing. You don't want to come in after the fact again and think, gee, we didn't do that. How are we going to fix it afterwards? They're making sure that diverse groups are brought to the table and considered, which hasn't necessarily been done before. And also, as you can well imagine, with diverse groups, there might be some conflict there. We need to meet that head on. We need to have the discussion about how you resolve that. We can't leave that as a conflict. So these are the kinds of things that this impact assessment deals with. And then another UK example, I really already talked about this, is sort of these data considerations. You may have heard the term data sovereignty, which is coming up a lot, so that we have complete control over the data that we give others and how it's used. And this chart really just speaks to that. Who's designing the systems that are collecting the data? What are they collecting? What are they analyzing? Who has access to that data? Where is that data stored? And how long is it stored, and really how is it being used? And then kind of on the diversity side, I wanted to throw another example here before I get into the real technology stuff. This is a framework, a mobility equity framework that was developed by the Greenlining Institute. And it has several steps about how to bring that diversity to the table. You don't just ask for the opinions at the beginning of a project. You include the diversity throughout the whole process. And it may come down to having to make hard choices because maybe you only have a certain amount of funding available. But people who should be involved in helping to make those choices, usually we don't ask them at that point. We've gotten their input, we've designed something, and we sit in our offices and sort of say, okay, well, I'm only getting half of the money that I really need, so what half can I do? But we don't go back out and really ask, what is the community's priority? I realize that's not free. There's a cost associated with that. So it's a balancing act, but I just wanted that food for thought there if that works. So getting into technology, and this is something we're discussing a lot with you, Lee, right at the moment, is mobility as a service. Now, how many folks in the audience know what that term means?
Is that a trick, Chris? Sounds like a trick.
Well, I could spend the entire rest of my time defining what it means because there's a lot of controversy about what it means. There is not one definition, but I will make it simple for you in order for me to present this information. It's providing the access to mobility services in one place. Overall, that's what it is. You go to one place to plan your trip, to make any reservations you need to make, and to pay for it. So you don't have to go to 5 different places. You're using one application to do that. That is a tremendous oversimplification, but suffice it for our discussion. So mobility as a service as a concept has been around now almost 10 years. At the beginning, when it was the subject of a master's thesis in Helsinki, a lot of us in the industry became immediately enamored with the concept because the idea was, I'm going to give you all your mobility alternatives in one place and make it easy for you to access everything in your life. It'll make it easier for you to access healthcare, education, shopping, entertainment, you name it. It's going to give you access to all those things. So a lot of us in the industry said, that's it. That's going to be the solution to everything. Guess what? We probably were not right about that because it was sort of this firestorm of people like me saying, wow, this is going to revolutionize mobility without doing our homework. So the whole idea, if you've seen, the movie Field of Dreams, build it and they will come. Well, guess what? We built it and they didn't come. And there's a lot of very good reasons that we now understand. So if anybody knows anything about the hype curve, there are people who don't agree with me on this, but we've said that mobility as a service kind of has gone down about as far as it can go. And in my humble opinion, it's coming back up. We're in a good spot. The reason why we're in a good spot is after 10 years, we finally understand why it didn't work originally. We did not bring in people who understood how travel behavior will change if someone is given certain alternatives. I live in the suburbs. I have a car sitting in my driveway. I've been working for myself for a while. I worked from home way before COVID. That car sits there, I dare say probably 95% of the time. But I live in the suburbs. I have virtually no alternatives. And I'm a public transit person. And when I used to commute into Boston every day, I took transit. I walked to a bus. I took the bus to the subway. I took the subway to my office. My friends thought I was insane. But there was no way I was going to drive there. Way too expensive, way too much traffic. Anyway, so we thought by building a technology system like mobility as a service, people would just automatically say, oh yeah, I'm not going to just jump in my car and drive to the supermarket. Sure. But we didn't understand how people changed their thinking. So over the last 10 years, there have been probably close to 100 mobility as a service pilots all over the world, including a few here. And one thing that we've not been able to say is what have they resulted in really good things, like increasing public transport ridership, for example, decreasing pollution, giving people actually increased mobility. There has not been a lot of really good things that have proven that that's what's going to happen. But as I say, the good news right now is we do understand the challenges. And so now we can tackle the challenges and move the needle forward where we are actually providing good alternatives for folks to not get in their single occupant vehicle. Now, another thing that some of you probably know a little bit about is at the University of Sydney, they did a trial of mobility as a service. And after the trial was over and they did an evaluation of it, they said, maybe we just need to call it something else. Well, we've all had that discussion. Okay, don't call it mobility as a service. Call it whatever you want. That's not going to change making it effective. I really don't care what the name of it is. But I think the idea is it has to be something that provides good alternatives, mobility alternatives, but it also has to be sustainable. And that's another thing we've not seen. Most of the pilots have not existed beyond the pilot phase. So that's another thing we're trying to address. How do you make this a long-term solution? And obviously there are a lot of things involved in that, funding. And I think I've been accused when I say what I'm going to say in a second of asking the wrong question. So you've got different stakeholders in mobility as a service. And one of them are the folks actually designing these applications, the one-stop shop, if you will. And we've never seen one of those companies be profitable. And so I get accused, you're barking up the wrong tree, you're asking the wrong question. In the US, public transport has never turned a profit either. But we provide federal and in some cases local support for public transport. It's for the public good. And definitely could be the situation here, but we just need to make sure we're not building these things to build them and that they have some value. So one interesting idea that, again, a couple of examples in Japan. So Japan has actually embraced this, but their take on this is more from a data perspective. And that's because when they look at a mobility ecosystem, they see that as a place where all the data about mobility is shared. So we're talking about open data, and that's not true everywhere in the world at all. And some of the folks in the mobility as a service industry have not been happy with some public transport authorities that have chosen not to open their data. And there are arguments, on many sides of that. But I really liked, and unfortunately you can't see it well on this slide, which you'll get copies of these slides, but they have a really great data architecture that supports mobility as a service. And they are actively promoting it. And in fact, at their federal level, at the ministry level, they've provided this guidance document for entrepreneurs and other companies that want to get involved in this. And they are providing some funding at the federal level for a number of these trials. So they, again, their view of this is kind of data centric. And again, I realize this is very hard to read, but that's what their focus is. And when you deal with data, you have to also bring in the governance part of it, any kind of policies and regulations. And I'm going to talk about that in another couple of minutes with some other data examples. But they've put several of these things in place. And I think it's very admirable. You don't hear a lot in Japan about overcoming the same challenges that I mentioned before. I think because their focus is a little bit different. They're also much more focused on people in my age group and the considered seniors. And so they're building a lot of these systems focused specifically on the disabled community, elderly, and again, with a data focus. So just an example there. So moving into talking about data and data governance. So in the US, we don't have an overall mobility data sort of strategy at all. This has been a very grassroots kind of thing. Some of you may have heard about the mobility data specification, the general transit feed specification, which is worldwide. It is not officially, so nobody can ding me on this, it is not officially a data standard. It is a specification, but it is used worldwide by many, many public transport authorities. And there are now many derivatives of that that focus on different aspects of public transport. So there's the general transit feed specification for real-time information. We're now in the community building the general on-demand feed specification. It's very much a grassroots development of a specification. It has suffered from a lack of funding, so it is not going forward as quickly. But fortunately, our federal government has been made aware of that, and I think is hopefully going to provide a little bit of seed money besides all of us volunteers that get together periodically to try to move these things forward. But my example here is in the UK. So very recently, they actually came up with a transport data strategy, which I think is very admirable because there was a project that I worked on probably early 2000s. And I did some interviews in the UK of public transport authorities when we were looking at open data in the US. And I was trying to understand, what might be going on outside of the US. And I remember my interview with Transport for London, one of the biggest transport agencies in the world. And I remember them saying, open up our data. There's no way. No way we're giving anybody any of our data about our operations or anything. It did a complete 180-degree turn, and they are now base everything on open data, and they've done some of the most innovative things with public transport data. It is all available online to anybody that wants to consume it. But in doing that, they realized that they needed a strategy to talk about the discoverability of that data, the governance, making sure, again, the data is made available to a diverse group. There have been other things going on in the UK, like the bus open data system, which is very powerful and kind of goes along with this. But if you get an opportunity to look at the strategy, I think there's a lot of good food for thought. And then there's a couple of other things I just wanted to highlight, and this is kind of at the European Commission, European Union level, where they have, for the most part, different countries have embraced open mobility data as well and have created what they call data spaces, or I think of them as mobility data ecosystems, where they bring together the governance piece, the infrastructure piece, which is very important, and I haven't really said anything about that, and then just guidance about how that data is shared. There's just a couple of examples here. The iShares system in the Netherlands is probably the most developed of these data spaces. And if you Google any of this, you can look at their specific data ecosystems. And many of these data spaces were created because there were these pockets of agencies not sharing their data. We do still have an issue of data standards, as I mentioned. Way back when I started my career, people didn't really talk about data standards, and if they did, they could only be developed and sort of blessed by like 3 organizations in the world. And it was a very prescribed process. It took a long time to get there. And what has happened over the last 5 years is people don't really want to wait that long. There's a real clamoring, we need this now. If we're trying to make our public transport systems more effective and more customer friendly, we need to put these things in place sooner than these sort of very burdensome processes will give us. So that did bring out things like the Open Mobility Foundation and a couple of other organizations, which are just as grassroots, and they don't go by this prescribed, ISO or any of the other very, specific standards development organizations. So things have kind of shifted there. But all right, so now moving into something else, and I realize this is a very US-centric term. Has anybody heard about this term, the fiscal cliff? I mean, good. So more people than when I was in Auckland. I got a lot of.
We're not saying anything about that.
I've heard about what you're not saying about
Sorry,
it.
Mark.
And I understand it because there's a direct analogy. So the short definition of fiscal cliff in the US sort of area is during COVID, public transport authorities were operating service without a lot of people riding, except for obviously the essential workers who could not work at home and had no other way. We had to remind some of our public transport authorities of that. But during that time, the federal government came through with funding because we already have, it's well known that we have a very bad fare box recovery rate in the US. It's very low, but here there was so little revenue. It was really, some of these agencies were in danger of actually going out of business. So a lot of money, awesome. When do you have that kind of thing happen? Not that I wanted COVID to be the reason for that at all, but it was an infusion of money that, again, a lot of us sitting in the industry was saying, wow, people, these agencies will be able to do great things with it. There were some really good things done, particularly on the technology side with that money, but there were also a lot of things done without any thought of sustainability. That funding is not going to show up again. And we have a new infrastructure law, thank goodness. But as many of you know, who knows what's going to happen during our next presidential election. I'll talk to you guys offline about that. But in any case, the fact that the money was made available allowed a number of agencies to go ahead with technology procurements that were very positive. It also caused some agencies to do very strange things. So during COVID in the US, a lot of public transport authorities stopped collecting fares. And the reason is we have this sort of typical setup where there's a fare box right next to the driver. So nobody wanted to have contact with the driver. The drivers didn't want close contact. So a lot of agencies stopped collecting fares, and this money actually helped them to continue to operate, which was wonderful. But a number of agencies said, oh, let's make transit free. That's another talk. I could give it another time because I'll be very upfront. I don't believe public transport should be free to everybody. Don't think that's quite the right approach. But during COVID, absolutely. But then people got it in their head, gee, we have all this money. Let's just keep making it free. Okay, so when the money runs out, how are you going to go back out to the community, reinstitute fares, and perhaps even have to increase them because you bought some things that aren't free? When you buy technology, it isn't just the capital expense. You got to pay to operate it and maintain it. So this is what we're calling the fiscal cliff. The end of our federal fiscal year is the end of September. A lot of that money goes away, and then our federal 24 fiscal year starts October 1st. So this is happening now, and agencies are scrambling. So from what I understand here, you've got awesome public transport funding for the next 3 years. And so the analogy I draw is, how do you get the most use out of that and focus on sustainable solutions that if you don't have that funding after the 3 years, or it's not as much, you can still operate and you're not turning things off, which is my concern in the US in particular. So that's what falling off that fiscal cliff is about. And kind of going along with that is, and I believe it's happened here as well, that COVID brought about a lot of changes, but when you talk about public transport, we saw changes to public transport before COVID. A lot of the younger generations, certainly a few before mine, really didn't want to own a car. They didn't want to be tied down to an automobile and the cost that brings with it, and just saw it as a hindrance. So we were struggling to make modifications to our transport models that we use to predict things like ridership and congestion and all of that. We were struggling to say, well, we've got these populations that are not going to be driving as much. How do we cope with that? Then COVID hit, and now we've got a complete shift again in commute patterns. It is not a Monday to Friday commute. Some downtowns are suffering because office space now has been significantly reduced because people are not in an office 5 days a week. It remains to be seen whether they ever will be back 5 days a week. And so there's all these things going on, but our models certainly haven't caught up to that yet. And fortunately, because there is a lot of data being collected, at least we can look at what's happening. So people much, much smarter than me have been doing some very detailed quantitative work on what is happening in the commuting space and what is being impacted by that if we don't bring our models, our transport models kind of up to speed. I mean, this first thing on the slide, still much uncertainty. That's probably going to be the case. I could have told you that without doing this study. But there is all this push and pull. People who were able to work from home, who really found it very effective in dealing with their family or being able to focus much more than they could if they spent. I mean, my commute used to be when I commuted into the very downtown part of Boston. I spent a little over an hour in the morning, and I spent at least an hour and a half on the way home. So that was 2.5 hours out of my day. I used to tell people, I walk out my front door at 6:10 in the morning, and I walk back in the front door at 6:10 in the evening. It's kind of a lot of time. When you get to work from home, all I have to do now is walk down a flight of stairs and not trip over my cats. That's about, so there's, it's very, and from a monetary perspective, from the corporate perspective, it's nice if you don't have to pay for as much office space, but you've got all these transport impacts that we really need to understand a little bit better, but we need to have those tools available in our transport models where we can run these various scenarios that we know are going on today and are potentially going to be extended into the next couple of years. So a little more food for thought. By the way, when you get these slides, I've put as many resources as I could, but if there's something you see that's missing, you'll have my contact info at the end. So I've already gone over my time here, so I'll try to wrap things up a little bit. I wanted to talk a little bit about artificial intelligence, not about ChatGPT. This has zero to do with that. I'm not going there. So what we've seen in the public transport space are some really innovative things. So, we're finally embracing. I was so thrilled when I walked around yesterday when I got here and I saw all the bus lanes. I'm in heaven. We're only just starting to embrace that. Okay, so New York City being the biggest urban area in the US, they started putting in bus lanes, but they have a significant problem with enforcement. And so there is a technology based on artificial intelligence that is actually helping them with enforcement on bus lanes. There's a couple of companies that offer it right now. It's been very successful. And I'm guessing that kind of technology is going to roll out as we get more and more bus lanes in our big urban centers. So that's a really positive piece. I was very fortunate enough to go to a series of webinars offered by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, which is in my backyard. And they have several very, very interesting projects going on in artificial intelligence and public transport. And overall, they are looking at projects in the area of public transport control. So at the dispatch level, the operational level, looking also at monitoring that service and being able to make dynamic decisions with that service, which is particularly critical when you're offering an on-demand service. I mean, that's what it's all about, right? It's a very flexible kind of service. You've got to have the right tools to be able to monitor and make very quick changes. And then there's also work being done in the policy area and public transport demand. So this very busy chart shows you the sort of myriad of projects going on in public transport. And I wanted to just mention one of them just for the sake of time. And by the way, presentations on all of these are available online. So, and I've given you part of the web address on the slide there. But one of the artificial intelligence projects that actually was implemented in Washington, D.C., is using artificial intelligence to improve customer feedback. So when I think about customer feedback, for better or worse, it's usually pretty negative, and it usually doesn't tell you a whole heck of what really was wrong. And you're often left on the agency side trying to interpret what somebody thought was wrong. And so, you know, you might get some, when I was on Twitter a lot more than I am now, you just see these very negative things, and you really couldn't even figure out what was going bad. But there have been several projects looking at using AI to extract information from that unstructured data and try to make some sense of it to actually put an actionable plan in place. And this kind of shows you that, you know, we don't usually get information that's actionable. So there have been now several projects that have looked at being able to use specific quantitative measures to look at that feedback that is coming in, and then actually being able to do something about it, rather than simply just trying to thwart the rants of negativity that often come after the first one. So I thought that was an interesting use of AI, and the fact that it's already been sort of implemented somewhere is very positive. So I've droned on long enough, but I hope that I've given you some food for thought, and I am open to any comments or questions whatever you have. Again, thank you so much for having me here. It's wonderful. Thank you. So
I actually have a question if no one else. I'm happy to ask the first question. Carol, and I know you always have so much information, you know so much. I'm interested to know what's happened with the mobility wallets, and that was being piloted in the States and particularly in Los Angeles, I think. And I'm not sure if anyone else is aware of what they are, but I'm quite interested to hear where the pilots have got to and what.
So I'm really glad that you brought that up. That actually came up in Auckland too. And I was really happy about it because it's something that actually is going very well. So the idea of a mobility wallet, if someone's not quite familiar with that term, is providing, you could call it incentives, subsidies for people that have access issues and may not, for example, be able to purchase like a monthly public transport pass because they just don't have enough money, or they are unbanked, or what we call underbanked. They don't have a credit card, they don't have a smartphone. All of those situations that make it so hard for people to access public transport. So they're given a wallet, and the mobility wallet will be loaded with a certain value so that they are free to use public transport, and in some cases extend that to being able to purchase other services. At some point, they're looking at combining it with food stamps and some welfare-related products that are already out there. But the mobility wallet pilot in Los Angeles has been tremendously effective. And in fact, we're bringing, if anybody is aware of the U.S. Transportation Research Board, there is an annual meeting in Washington every January. It's the biggest transportation conference in the U.S. on an annual basis. We are actually running a workshop, and I'm putting together this session to bring people in to talk about mobility wallets. And the Success in LA is going to be one of those presentations in the workshop. But it has helped already, even though it's only a pilot, with bringing access to people who previously did not have access for any variety of reasons. So it's been very successful. Is that something you're thinking about here potentially? Or
I'm looking out there to see if
Just
anyone.
wonder if there's synergies with community connect.
so you may be able to glean some examples from that. And there's been some very good press about some initial evaluations on LinkedIn. So if you Google it, you'll probably come up with that. They've been very good about communicating how it's going. They're not the only folks. That's the biggest mobility wallet project that I know of. There are smaller ones going on, like in the state of Minnesota. There's a lot of work being done with on-demand public transport in Minnesota. Minnesota is a very rural northern state. And of course, because of the rural spaces, trying to provide effective public transport has been really challenging there. And a great amount of the population is what we consider low income as well. And they don't typically have access to technology. So that's another place where they're piloting the mobility wallet concept. So,
Thank you.
sure.
Right at the start, you talked about transport systems not being designed for a woman, or probably the other way around, designed for men. Great for me. But are there other examples that you could give of where it has been done well, or to be inclusive? Very easy, as you say, to be negative, but has anyone got it right?
I think now, the example that I remember, and it was the year I believe we met each other in Singapore. There was a session where someone from the UK, a woman from the UK, had these great slides about how in the design of public transport, women were just excluded. So women wearing high heels, women with baby carriages, let's see, women with larger parcels or whatever. So it kind of started, again, as a very negative thing. But what they've started to do in the UK, because of this equality impact assessment, is to turn that all into a positive. So with the new Elizabeth line, which I was fortunate enough to ride last November, and I'll be probably, because I'm a transit geek, I'll be riding it again in September when I'm back in the UK. When they did the design of the stations, it took a lot of that into consideration. So now the platforms are much more accessible to people, to anybody with a large parcel or a buggy or whatever. Also, there are not places where women wearing high heels will lose a heel because they get stuck in a grate. There's none of that. So that's very positive. But that's one example I can give you where putting that equity assessment in place has really turned things in a very positive direction. That's one example that I can think of. There's another example, actually, I meant to mention before, but this is more sort of accessibility related. So again, I'm from the Boston area. Our major urban public transport system is called the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority. It provides all kinds of public transport service in eastern Massachusetts. So extensive bus network, subway lines, light rail lines, commuter rail, ferries. And back about 10 years ago or so, they were starting to implement electronic signage in the subway system. I mean, we almost hadn't graduated from using tokens for fare payment. We've come a long way since then, but they're implementing these signs to tell you when the next subway is coming. Very, very useful, especially with some of the operational problems. You want to know when the next train is coming. So they placed these signs parallel to the right-of-way of the subway. So what's wrong with this picture, particularly for someone who is either as short as I am or perhaps using a mobility device like a wheelchair? Their viewing angle is very different. And if anything passes in front of them, they will never see that sign. So there was a very big lawsuit against the Public Transport Authority not just about those signs. That was one of probably 50 different items in that lawsuit. But the lawsuit was brought by the Boston Center for Independent Living, which basically supports persons with disabilities, seniors, and making sure that they have equal access to public transport. So one of the things that the Transport Authority lost the lawsuit, and they were forced to put in several changes. So our Americans with Disabilities Act had already been passed, but it didn't deal with things like electronic signage, because that didn't even exist in 1990 in the US. So nobody thought about where do you put the sign so everybody can see it. So now all of those signs that were placed parallel to the right of way were all, they legally had to become perpendicular to the right of way, and they had to be two-sided. So that really, at any point in your journey, no matter who you were, you could either see it, or if you had a visual impairment, you could hear it. That was another thing that was not well thought out at the beginning. So again, kind of a negative start. It was a lawsuit, which nobody wanted to see, but it resulted in something very positive and a lot of lessons learned. So
I've got a couple of examples, just personal experience, see whether or not you've experienced these around the world. So I'm vertically challenged.
Thank you.
And when there is a bus stop immediately outside my old house, and numerous times buses have gone straight past me, even though I'm waving. I actually turn the light on my phone and wave it at them, but they just don't see me. Is there any international solution for how you actually get a bus to stop? So that's one example.
Yeah.
And the other one is I've quite often on the train coming home missed my stop because the trains are fogged up, it's dark, you don't see the station names, or it's not. So those two scenarios from accessibility point of view.
So I'm very vertically challenged, so completely understand what you mean. There have been several places around the world where the same thing was happening, where people were requesting that the bus stop there, but maybe it was at night and they didn't have a cell phone, you know, like you said, even you're waving it. And the very simple solution that was actually put in place was to put a push button to a light that was absolutely could be seen by the bus driver. Of course, it has to be placed in such a place near a stop or a shelter so that the driver would see it. That definitely has been put in place. And remind me the other one.
The other one was getting the train to stop when knowing where
Yes.
you are because it's dark and foggy dark.
So probably the best example of that, two very diverse places in the world that I've experienced that. One is in Tokyo. Most of the subways in Tokyo, inside the subway car, it is constantly telling you on a map where you are. So even if you can't see outside, it will tell you where you are and what the next stop is. So I've traveled a lot in Tokyo on all the various subway lines because there are numerous lines. And that is very helpful. It's also very helpful when it's absolutely filled to capacity and someone like me is never going to be able to see, you know, what's going on. The good thing now in the US is we have a number of in-vehicle systems, and it's very prominent in our bus systems in the US, the fixed route bus systems, to have what we either call a voice enunciation system, like you were mentioning at the outset, or they have other names, but it announces the upcoming stops. And I mean, the technology has existed for years to do that, but it took a while for agencies to embrace that in the US. So actually, it will tell you based on GPS and where the bus is located and what route it's operating on, it will say next stop, 5th and Main. So for someone like me that is a visitor in so many places around the world, that is such a helpful thing, especially when you're on a bus. That's the one thing that I'm always a little, in fact, I took the Airport Express here, being the transit person that I am. And I just needed to figure out what the closest stop to my hotel would be. And so I was kind of looking, and it was fairly easy to figure out. It wasn't on board the bus, but there were not a lot of people on the bus. So I could, and I could bring up on Google Maps, where I was. But we have a lot of systems that exist now that will tell you. We're now putting that in a lot of our subway systems in major urban areas, kind of like the Tokyo case. But Tokyo started doing that probably 20, 25 years ago. So it does exist.
What's the best public transport system in the world that you've experienced and why?
I knew somebody was going to ask me that. It's okay. It's okay. I like the question. It's just really hard to answer because if you think about it from a customer perspective, I don't know that a lot of people would agree with me, but I think Tokyo is, but let me explain why I'm saying that. Tokyo has the most complicated subway system, and don't even talk about buses. Like I'm not even going there because that's truly complicated. But the subway side of it, they have made it almost foolproof for people who don't understand Japanese at all. And from a sheer customer perspective. So let me tick off the things that I think make it the best. Wayfinding. A lot of Tokyo's subway stations have 16 entrances and exits. It would probably take you hours to figure out which exit, if you're leaving the subway system, as to where you want to be on the surface. I would never be able to do that myself, and I've been there a lot. I know a number of the neighborhoods there. Their wayfinding is so good that when you get off the train, you immediately see static wayfinding that says, if you want to go to this museum, here is the door that you use, and it's in this direction. And it will continue to help you wayfind. It doesn't stop after that. Some places you at least get the beginning, but then you kind of get lost because you don't know how to physically finish getting to that door. The onboard train, the map that shows you where you are in the network, what the upcoming stop is, even if, like me, you are going to want to stand on the wrong platform. Like here, when I have to remind myself to look in the opposite direction when I am crossing the street. There is static signage literally on the wall where the subway is coming that shows the name of the previous stop in letters, not in both Japanese characters, in letters that someone like me could read. The previous stop is in this gray color. The stop you're at is very bold. And the next stop is somewhat bolded, but at least you know you are standing in exactly the right spot, not going to that platform and saying, oh, I wanted to go, and it's showing me that that's gray, and that was on, I need to move to the other platform in order to get it. So there are so many different tools. Now, one thing I kind of laugh about, having been involved in helping agencies provide real-time information for many, many years, which I'm still doing, it's almost funny in Tokyo because I don't need any real-time information because the next train's probably going to be in 2 minutes. I'm from a place where it's not going to be in 2 minutes. So I really like having that sign. Like, is this 10 minutes? Can I go buy a newspaper or do something else? So I think Tokyo kind of tops it, but I will tell you, the new Elizabeth line is awesome. They kind of thought about almost all of the same things. And you go into one of the stations and, the length of the number of cars on the train, everything about what direction you're going in, what other things. And a lot of that is actually electronic now. They also have the nice subway doors so nobody can fall in the right of way, which is helpful. They don't have that all over Tokyo, but some of the lines have that. So, but there are a lot of other good public transport systems around the world too, but those kind of float to the top of my list.
Thank you.
Probably one more question, and then probably we need to wrap up, I think. But we do have.
And I'm here.
So Carol's here, and I think
yours.
we can have some drinks and chat to Carol continue. But Malcolm.
Is someone else?
No, it's you. Your turn.
I mean, there's huge potential in IT you talked about,
Huge.
but it can be hard to keep up. I mean,
I agree.
Getting back to my personal experience, I find it difficult I can't use apps to access the car share scheme or to load my phone with the money for my snacker card. You might say I'm a cheapskate, I just have to buy a better phone and an upgrade.
No,
But
I'm with you.
If I'm having that problem, I think others would be having even greater problems.
Absolutely.
So is there anywhere that there's been provision made for grandparenting so that new generations of technology can bring people along? They don't have to keep reinvesting in the smartphones, whatever it is they need.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought that up because we had a similar discussion in Auckland a few days ago for exactly that. So in the US, one thing that the Americans with Disabilities Act did for us was to say that if I provide some information to the public visually, there are going to be people that can't access it. So that I somehow will have to provide that information audibly. That's all pre-smartphone and apps and everything. But what that made agencies think about was providing the alternative way to access the information. So it kind of started that way. Now, when apps started, and a lot of people that don't have smartphones, it's not that you're a cheapskate at all. I find it very challenging. I find it very challenging now. I do a lot of flying internationally, and every airline wants you to have their app. Now, I'm going to sound probably as old as I am. I always want to have a paper boarding pass as a backup because I have an older phone which doesn't hold a charge for very long at the moment. Hopefully I'll remedy that when I get home. But again, I don't want to load all these apps if I'm only going to use them once. So in public transport, for the most part, although it makes it more costly, a lot of our public transport agencies have kept a regular phone line. Someone can pick up an old legacy phone, not a mobile phone, and call the transport authority either to book a ride if they're on a paratransit service, or to ask that something get loaded to their account. And in a lot of places, we're implementing mobile fare payment, which you will all be doing at some point soon. But again, what about the person who doesn't have a smartphone, doesn't want to load the app, doesn't have a bank account or a credit card? We need to be able to physically give them a card that they can go to the local convenience store and just load a couple of dollars. That is being done pretty much throughout the US because at our federal level, there have been a lot of studies at the Federal Trade Commission and some of the more financial parts, actually looking at the percentage of population in the US that is unbanked, underbanked, no credit card, no smartphone, still paying for minutes on a smartphone, so they don't want to use up their minutes. And it's a higher percentage than I think anybody realizes. So I think our transport authorities are very aware of that. I just helped an agency in central Massachusetts put in a mobile fare payment system, and it does cost more money, but they made sure that they were able to give smart cards out to people who could go to any network of convenience stores and just add $1 or $2, because oftentimes that's all they can afford. So it was taking away that technology burden. And then if you maintain that legacy part of it, you've accounted for the people who really don't have access to the technology or don't want to use it. So it costs a little bit more, but
Carol, thank you very much.
you're so welcome.
On behalf of ITS New Zealand, and I think on behalf of Greater Wellington as well, thank you for an awesome presentation. I started to write down things about your presentation, which was they're always topical, on point, great mix of where technologies are at, but you also bring in lots of thought-provoking conversation as well, which
Thank you.
I think is really important. You also remind us that improving accessibility and equity and inclusion is not, or it doesn't have to involve technology. It's not always about technology. So on behalf of everyone here, please can we just show our appreciation? The other thing I want to say is, Carol, I know that she only scratched the surface of what she knows. She knows so much, and she is very, very generous with her knowledge. So without, please don't bombard her, but also take the opportunity while she's here to come up and ask her, we'll go in there, I think, grab a drink. Take the opportunity to ask Carol anything you want to. And as she said, this presentation will be made available to everyone as well. So thank you once again. Thank you, Carol.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Greater Wellington, again.
Yes.
I just wanted to say thanks to everyone for coming, but also to thank Lee and ITS for giving us this opportunity to host. So thanks very much, Lee. Thank you so much, Carol.
You're quite welcome.
We have drinks and food courtesy of ITS in the next room, but probably need to make it about a 6:45 close, but there's lots of food and lots of drinks. So looking forward to the networking.
Thank you. Thank you.